Welcome, everybody. This is a Rich and Lonely podcast, smartest podcast in the world. I'm Rich, and today we're going to be talking about a film directed by a Brazilian screenwriter, Cal Hamburger. This film is called The Year My Parents Went on Vacation. So, this film won many awards and some international film festivals and was also assigned to us to watch for my Latin American cinema course. The Year My Parents Went on Vacation is a coming-of-age story about a boy named Mauro, who was left in a city in Brazil for a few months. His parents took him about 7.5 hours away from his hometown of Belo Horizonte and dropped him at his grandfather's apartment in Sao Paulo. Upon leaving, they promised that they would return by the start of the 1970 World Cup that was coming up. Mauro's parents were escaping persecution from the government for being political activists during a military dictatorship. After Mauro's parents leave, he finds out that his grandfather has passed away the same day he arrived. After the funeral, the neighborhood, which consists of mainly Jewish people, come together to take care of Mauro until his parents return. I really like how in this film they show culture shock from the perspective of a curious young boy trying to understand the world around him. His neighbor Shlomo, who basically took care of him the most, was a grumpy, devout Jewish man living by himself until Mauro arrived. Both Mauro and Shlomo changed over time due to the presence of the other. Mauro learns to appreciate traditional Jewish values, while Shlomo learns to be more patient and grows to appreciate Mauro's company. I really liked how, although the story was taking place during a historically significant period of time in Brazil, the film is framed in the perspective of a kid who doesn't understand or care much about the politics. I was never really sure of what would happen next, or whether or not it would be a happy or sad ending. While watching it, I felt like there was something bad constantly going on, just barely out of sight. There were students being thrown out into the streets, beaten, and then arrested. The film focuses on different ideologies of specific characters and what they represent. Mauro meets a college student named Italo, who represents a radical aspiring communist, and Shlomo represents a faithful Jewish man. The way Shlomo is arrested and mistreated for being under the suspicion of being an activist shows how bad the oppressive forces were, even impacting law-abiding elderly citizens. And I think that this film does a good job suggesting the social and political climate in Brazil at the time, while also focusing on Mauro's personal development. And while the story focuses on Mauro and his specific experiences, this film also shows themes of immigration, just like the community as a whole. Basically, a collective of a bunch of different immigrants. The film even ends with Mauro and his mother leaving the country, becoming exiles. So I think that it gives you a different perspective on immigration and the immigrant as a person. Mauro's whole situation gives us a different kind of perspective that we probably wouldn't have had on our own. Soccer plays a big part in this film because it is the one thing that unites everyone, no matter their social class or religious belief. When Brazil was playing, everyone was a part of the same team. I found it interesting how the female bartender, Irene, had a nameless mixed-race boyfriend that she couldn't really show affection to in public. I felt that this gave a pretty good idea of the societal racism at the time. At the same time, I don't exactly understand the need for the character in regard to the main plot of the movie. The further into the movie the viewer gets, the more anxious and claustrophobic Mauro's world feels. Mauro is the representation of the alienation of the outsider since his father's side of the family was Jewish. When Mauro's mother finally returns, the audience is filled with more questions about her and Mauro's father's so-called vacation. We find out that Mauro's fathers probably won't ever return, and that Mauro and his mother must leave Brazil to continue living as exiles. I think that this film did well both to allude the national problems in Brazil, but while keeping focus on specific experiences of one community that was impacted. After seeing this film, I've definitely had a different kind of perspective on immigration and the things that come with it being an immigrant and trying to immigrate somewhere. I understand that there's various reasons that anybody could ever want to immigrate or anybody would ever have to. And so through this film, I've learned to appreciate more about my life, as well as all the little things that I tend to take for granted. Maru's development in this film, it goes by very slowly, but I feel like at the same time, it's almost changing the viewer as well as Maru. We're learning more about Jewish traditions and their values, while also kind of getting a better idea of what life is like in Sao Paulo in the 1970s. At the start of the film, Maru is more concerned with being a striker, but then after all the events that happened to him, by the end, he's decided that what he wants is to be a goalie. And I feel like this is very interesting because I never would have wanted to be a goalie when I played soccer. I think it's a really hard job to do. You have a whole lot of stress in your hands, and if you mess up, then your team loses. But also I can see Maru's perspective in that if he's good enough, then he's going to keep his team on his back. And I think that that's kind of honorable to see, and it kind of gives me a different kind of perspective on my own life and the way that I view things. I feel like by the end of the film, Maru is able to see things more clearly while letting go of the things that he doesn't need to take with him. Through the scene of Maru giving Hannah the ball, that's kind of his way of letting go of his childhood and letting go of being the same person that he was at the beginning. And I think that that's important because our experiences are going to be the things that contribute to who we actually become as people. And I think that it's really important to go through hardships and understand why they happened. And through this film, you're able to see different kind of hardships that Maru has to go through and empathize with him, while also understanding that these things are what helped Maru become the person that he is at the end of the film. So that's kind of a brief summary of the year my parents went on vacation, as well as my own opinions. Do yourself a favor, go check this movie out. It's great. It'll give you a whole different idea of the life in Latin America in the 1970s. Well, that's all for our show today. Catch us next week on Rich and Lonely Podcast, coolest podcast in the world. I'm Rich, and I'll catch y'all later. Thanks, guys. That's a tough one I had.